but people are dying with vaping.
That's President Donald Trump talking about the impact of vaping products on American citizens. In September, the Trump administration announced plans to ban all flavored e-cigarettes in an effort to combat youth addiction. But despite his initial enthusiasm, Trump refused to sign off the ban on November 4th, convinced by his advisors that his decisive actions would result in negative repercussions. Now, whether or not that actually would have been effective is something that we'll discuss later in the video. But in terms of regulation, we're now back at the status quo, which isn't something to celebrate. In 2018, the Surgeon General claimed that the spike in e-cigarette use among teens was an epidemic. And in just the span of 1 year between 2017 and 2018, e-cigarette use increased by 78% among high schoolers. For the past few years, citizens have been joking about raising a generation of nicotine addicts through e-cigarettes. But that actually might be just exactly what's going on. From the 47 deaths linked to vaping-related illnesses and even FDA's warnings to e-cigarette giant Juul, news outlets have been covering vaping non-stop. So it's not an issue that people are unaware of, but it does seem like there is a lot of misinformation, which majorly contributes to the problem. For example, a lot of people still believe that the 47 deaths caused by vaping-related illnesses were linked to legal vaping products, while in actuality, they were all caused by one chemical, namely vitamin E acetate, which is found in THC cartridges that are from the black market. Additionally, a lot of young people don't believe that using e-cigarettes is harmful for their health. And even worse, the National Institute of Drug Abuse claims that 66% of teenagers think that just flavoring is in their e-cigarette. And a lot of people believe that e-cigarettes are safe to use. And yeah, the thousands of carcinogens that come from cigarette combustion aren't in vaping systems simply because the liquid nicotine gets vaporized instead of burnt. But still, there's no evidence that says that e-cigarettes are safe to use. Nobody knows the long-term health effects of inhaling these chemicals simply because there hasn't been enough time since the e-cigarette was first invented in the mid-2000s. And the public's lack of correct knowledge on this topic proves that we need more education on e-cigarettes and just drug use in general. We need to not only educate kids about the effects of nicotine addiction, but we also have to educate parents about how to help their kid if they happen to have a nicotine addiction. And instead of forcing kids out of school by expelling them for possessing an e-cigarette, we should actually force them into rehab so that they learn from their mistakes and understand why what they're doing isn't good for them. Now, another problem with this issue is that big companies like Juul, for example, constantly promote their products as cessation tools, which are basically tools to help smokers stop smoking. And to be fair, there has been a good number of people that have actually quit smoking due to e-cigarettes, and that's why we can't ban e-cigarettes entirely. But when it comes to youth, we can't just let this problem slide. According to Professor Susan E. Collins from the University of Washington School of Medicine, nicotine changes the neurochemistry of the prefrontal cortex. The American Heart Association also claims that nicotine can raise blood pressure and even increase risk of heart attack. If a bunch of young adults and kids get hooked on nicotine because of e-cigarettes, and surprise, it's actually happening right now, we may as well be raising a generation of nicotine addicts. And remember how I told you that we were going to talk about the flavor ban later in the video? Well, turns out it actually won't solve the problem, because when people are addicted to nicotine, they just want the nicotine. They won't care about the flavor. But that's not to say that federal regulation is bad. In fact, that's exactly what we need, just not on flavors, but rather on nicotine concentration. In the EU, the highest allowed nicotine concentration is 20 milligrams per milliliter, while in the US, it's 59 milligrams per milliliter. Lowering the legal maximum will make sure that previous smokers who are trying to quit through e-cigarettes will still be able to quit, while previous non-smokers who try e-cigarettes won't get nearly as addicted on nicotine. And just one last note, although you and I were not the President of the United States, we can still do a couple of things just to help in our own communities. One, you could write to school administration about the importance of having drug education in schools for both parents and students. And secondly, if you happen to have any friends that are dealing with nicotine addiction, you can always refer them to an adult, or you can even point them to resources like teen.smokefree.gov. Lastly, you can even help inform your community by sharing up-to-date and correct information about this issue on social media. Even small things like sharing new information can have a big impact on your community and raise a lot of awareness. That's all I have for today, but if you have any questions, feel free to ask.